Yeah, the stream quality seems to be good. It's like 4,000 kilobytes per second, so it seems to be
All right.
good. Where are you operating from? Atlanta?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, yes. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, uh, and well, actually, we're 45 minutes north of Atlanta. We're in a
Cool.
place called Woodstock, which is kind of out of the city limits a bit. But yeah, we're in a bit of nature here,
Cool.
and yeah, very nice place.
So I see people saying hello. Hey, Vincenzo, how are you? Good to see you. And basically, I mean, I would split this like streaming between like more about philosophical questions about making music with electronical devices and going deeper into you're a modular, you're a rack, or whatever you're using right now. So I mean, when did you start making music like with DAWs? At the very beginning, was it like at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s? What's your first like DAW or recall about working with computers and music together?
Well, let's see here. I would say it actually went back to I think my first computer I had in the early 90s was the Atari 1040 ST.
Yeah.
I was running Cubasis at the time and had a keyboard with the MIDI port. That was actually remember buying it. American Music was a store that's long gone now here in Atlanta, but back then in the early 90s, that's what a lot of people were sequencing their
Yeah.
electronic music with, and the MIDI resolution of that was pretty tight.
Still now.
It still is. I actually still know people that still
Yeah.
use them.
Yeah.
And yeah, because it was just a dedicated machine just for writing music. That's
Yeah.
all it did.
Yeah.
For those people that are familiar with it, I used that for a while actually. And the reason why I bought it was because several people that I was really influenced by at the time that I was listening to, groups like 808 State and some of these early electronic acts from England, were all using that computer. And I was like, well, they're not that expensive. I might as well invest and see what it's all about. So that was my first introduction to using a computer-based system for MIDI sequencing. Prior to that, I was using all hardware in MIDI and CB Gate. Actually, the very first stuff I got, my first setup, there wasn't any MIDI. It was all CB Gate and using analog devices, SH-101, ARC 2600, ARC sequencer. I'd gotten the Roland MC4 sequencer, MC202. I bought into mostly early vintage analog stuff in the early 90s, mainly because it was cheap.
Yeah.
That's what my music shops back in the day were the pawn shops and secondhand places, Salvation Army, stuff like that. And just because I wanted to learn about this stuff. And at that time, I had mentioned this in another interview, but that was like a golden era where you could buy like an Oberheim expander for $100 or $150. I bought it. That was one of the buys I got. I bought an Oberheim expander for I think $150, and Jupiter 6 I paid $350 for, or it was right around $350, which I still have. I still have it over here.
So
a lot of that.
So you didn't do the double round like a lot of people did, and like I did, that you bought something in the 90s for cheap, that you sold it for cheap, and then you rebought it like in 20 years later for like crazy money, like I did actually.
No, I did the same thing. Yeah. There were a lot of things that I sold, based purely on the fact that at that point in time, if I remember correctly, I had a tech that would work on a lot of my synths at the time. His name was Tim, and he was an ex-Sequential Circuits, Oberheim, Roland tech here in Atlanta. It worked with a lot of different studios, repairing a lot of keyboards and that would come in. And he was a very close friend of mine. He taught me a lot about analog circuitry. I was scouring the pawn shops every weekend, buying these, hey, I got an SH09. I don't know what oscillator one's not working and the pots are all scratchy. And Tim would, well, bring it into the shop. I'll look at it and see if I can get it working, So I would buy a lot of this stuff for cheap. Even if it was broken, I would buy it.
Yeah.
I bought tons of like ARP Odysseys and ARP Axes and I went through literally hundreds of analog keyboards. And for me, the way I looked at it was, hey, I'll buy these things, fix them up, figure out how to understand them, learn how to use them, learn about synthesis. For me, it was more about education, because at that time I was pretty young. I was in high school.
Yeah.
I was 16, 17 years old when I started to buy all this stuff. And so I was basically a sponge. So I was reading a lot of stuff. And one of the I want to say one of the most influential books that I had gotten at that time, there were a couple, but one of them in particular was the Analog Synthesizers Handbook by Mark Vale.
I remember that.
Big, thick book. But, and that book was great because it had so many iconic, well-known vintage synthesizers that were, not only explained in the book in great detail, but also they showed different artists that use these instruments in the context of what they use them for. Like one of the examples was Ben Burtt, who I'd been a huge fan of from the Star Wars films, and how Ben Burtt had created the sounds of R2-D2 with the ARP 2600. And the 2600 was one of the first, I would say officially first analog semi-modular synths that I had bought back then.
Wow.
And I think, I bought it. That I bought for $250, and I still have it. I still have my original 1971 2600 here that I've had since high school. And I learned on that thing. That was an extremely educational synthesizer to get at 17 years old, right? You think about that age, when you're learning stuff. Up until that point, I'd only had fixed environment synthesizers where all the functionality was fixed. The oscillator ranges were fixed, you only had a certain number of ways to working with the instrument. They didn't have patch points. So with the ARP, you could totally use the ARP in standalone mode without any patch cables and just do everything with fader combinations. Or you could use the 66 patch points to link up the various different modules and see how one module interacts with another module. Whether in these concepts like amplitude, what's amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, cross modulation between two oscillators, what happens when, these concepts to me at the time as a 17-year-old, I was like, whoa, when I ran the square wave into this and then took the output of that and ran it back into that, it made this happen. And I had so many, that was such a great time for me because I could devote all the time. I didn't have any other obligations at that point, except for my girlfriend that was always mad at me for not hanging out. She used to call me, she used to get mad at me because I would take up what she called musical minutes. She said, "Are you coming over or what?" And I'm like, "I promise I'll be over at your place."
In a few minutes.
3 hours would go by. I'd get an angry phone call. She's like, "Forget it. I'm just coming over to your house. I know you're playing with something or tinkering around with one of your synths or something."
I think my wife is still experiencing this. But luckily, because of the lockdown, I'm operating from my house. So, and I think you are operating from your house too. So that's at least we get rid of that travel time, to go to the other spot. I take a musical minute, but then I just cross the living room and I'm there.
We're a lot closer to home. Yeah. Back then I was a 15-minute drive from my girlfriend's place, but I feel bad for her. I have to say I'm sorry because she could have probably been with a much better guy that would have given her much more attention.
So that was still MIDI era. We are talking about the 90s, almost late 90s. The DAW, even the Atari ones, if you remember, with the Falcon 30, 030, they started to introduce audio in their DAWs. What was your what is your first recall about actually tinkering and trying recording with audio? Like, I don't know if you went through ADAT first or Tascam D8088, or you had one of those hardware recorders like CBX D5 or CBX D3 from Yamaha. I had those. They were crazy, creating problems on the audio, creating like hums inside the actually recorded audio. And did you get excited about that, and your workflow changed because you could actually record directly audio inside the DAW, or not?
Well, it was for me. It was a very slow process. I, like I'd mentioned, I'd working primarily with a big analog mixing desk. I had a very large 32-channel analog desk that I would run all my stuff into, and routed all these sequencers and drum machines and linked them up by MIDI, and had hardware sequencers that were also controlling stuff. And on top of that, using a bunch of CB gate stuff as well. There was a mixture of both in-sync MIDI and control voltage, kind of all a mishmash of stuff. And the way that I was recording in the beginning during that time period was the DAT, digital audio tape. So
wow.
I had like 2 or 3 of the Panasonic SV3700 DAT machines. I think I had the 4100 later on, and I still have 2 of them because I have, probably.
Database,
yeah. I think back now, and I probably have 3 boxes of 2-hour been on DAT tapes of just hundreds of tracks that I recorded that time. I need to, at some point in time, get these off the old DATs and into the digital realm, and because there was still some good stuff in there that I'd like to listen back to one day. So it's pretty fun things I tried back with these early experiments, and so I started using DAT first, and then I was initially doing. Taking the stuff out of my mixing board. I had a compressor and a limiter and some EQs, and it was not really high quality stuff by any means. I was still kind of learning. And then the end result, the master mix out would go directly into the DAT machine, and then I would just record into the DATs. And then eventually, when I started using because the computer in the beginning for me wasn't really a recording device. It was you primarily used
sequencer. Sequencer.
Yeah. It wasn't until I would say mid 90s, 96, 95, I bought my first personal computer was I think it was either a Dell or a Gateway 66 megahertz machine. It was at the time, pretty crude machine to be making music on, but and I was using there wasn't much software then. I was using SoundForge. There was
Cubase, maybe. It was
Cubase. Cubase was around, and Logic was around.
If you remember those crazy audio interfaces at the beginning, Gina. Remember the Gina from Echo? Was it one of the very first, actually, like very cheap and affordable, like multi-input and output interface? But I still remember the problems that I had working in professional studios with, what's the name of the SPX80, the synchronizer. And every night or every day, the offset was different. So every day, my drum sequencing plus the audio together synchronized with the Mitsubishi machine were always syncing in a different point. It was such a pain in the ass,
I know exactly how you feel. Yeah. I went through many struggles getting a lot of this equipment to work, and trying to we think about a lot of the things that maybe you and I had to go through growing up just to write a song, just to record a piece of music was a much more complicated process back then than it is now. Now anyone could just grab an iPad or a laptop, and you could write an incredible song just with.
So would you say that, but at some point, even if it was a slow process, you got into full, there were a point like you got fully in the box and enjoying the incredible possibilities of in the box DAW virtual instruments, or that never happened, to go back then to a full hybrid setup like you have now, where you use your hardware, you use your Euro Rack, and you use everything? Was there because I remember like 2000, maybe 12, 13, or maybe even a little bit like 14, 15, where like the power was there, and the multi-processing of the computers, and also virtual instruments started to become really serious. Like wavetable synthesis was really a thing with Serum and all this, later on, software that, I mean, technically, quality-wise, there's no difference. It's only about the UI. It's only about the tactile feel and how you interface with, and how your passions also. I'm passionate about polyphonic synthesizer, analog synthesizer, or digital, or I'm passionate about your rack. So I surround myself about, with those things. But there's no excuse not to make a great record nowadays with just an in-the-box setup, So was there ever a point where you were fully in the box and say, like, did you see Junk XL selling all his gear, the other day? He put,
I did. Yeah,
so like almost like liberating feeling. I had that. I remember starting to sell outboard gear. I remember 2015, I was already moved in LA, and I remember one year particularly sold $160,000 worth of outboard gear, like all the tube compressor, incredible EQ, and I felt liberated in some way, Did you ever have some of those like liberation moments or?
Yeah. Well, I actually produced and recorded 4 albums completely in the box, where everything was synthesized, generated, all inside the box. So I was very familiar. I went through a phase where I went really hardcore into DSP programming and these DSP coded environments. I was using, I still use Max MSP and Reactor, and I dove really, really hard into it. Super Collider. This was in the early 2000s when I switched over from PC to using Macintosh-based computers. With my first computer being it was a Mac Quadra. I got in college, and a 650 Quadra, and I remember getting some of the first apps that were available on Mac OS X. And I think one huge turning point for me was hearing Super Collider. When I heard James McCarthy's Super Collider app, that really blew my mind away. I didn't know that a computer could sound so organic and so complex and so detailed, I just honestly had never heard anything like that before. I remember hearing like the FM landscape patch, which was this, organically growing patch of like these FM timbres that were constantly changing and growing and deteriorating over time. And, there was nothing linear based about it. It was just these, it's an environment that's based on the Smalltalk programming language. And so it uses all these list operators. So it's basically just these coded scripts that you call up different objects from a list library, and then you define the variables for each one of the patches. You could design some GUIs in it, some interface controls for some of the patches. That came a little bit later on as it progressed, and I got really into that. I remember being introduced to Super Collider and C Sound, and I just honestly didn't know, because prior up into that point, the only things that I had heard were things like Rebirth, stuff like that, emulations of classic XOX drum machines, groove boxes, and these sort of like crude additive subtractive synthesizers and things like that. I guess I just didn't know that the computer, doing things in the computer realm could give you such infinite complexity, and that really, really perplexed me. And up until that point, when I was using modular synths, like I bought many other modular systems during the mid 90s, like the EMS Synthy, Electrocomp 101, ARP 2500, 6-panel Surge. I mean, I had a lot of stuff at one point. And so I knew, I was very familiar with working with modulars. And to me at that point, to get very organic sounds like I was hearing in Super Collider, the only way that I knew that I could achieve some of that stuff was using some of these other esoteric modular-based systems. So it really, really blew me away. I was like, well, maybe I don't need to use all this stuff. Maybe I could just focus on using the computer, and these more advanced DSP oriented systems like the Kima system, which I still use today. I use the Pacarena, and I actually bought the first version of Kima when it was the Capybara, the System 320. Kind of just went through the channels of upgrading, but so I was very fascinated with these various different systems that can manipulate sound in very sophisticated ways, and doing synthesis, resynthesis, using FFT based analysis, spectral processing, and spectral morphing, and these more sort of complicated or more complex, sort of sonic processing techniques. Was really, really intriguing to me. So I dived really, really deep for many years into that and worked primarily in the computer, 100%, and made a lot of music that way. It was great. I loved it. And then at some point, for me at least, the one thing about working in the box that kind of bugged me always was just the interfacing, the thing that I was missing most about it was the immediate feedback you get when you work with a real instrument. It's anything like a guitar. A guitar is a great example. Yeah. You play the guitar, it resonates, you feel it. You feel the vibrations up against your chest. The strings resonate and vibrate against your fingers. It's a very physical, tactile experience that you can't really replicate that with a computer. Maybe sonically you could get close to that, but the actual act of physically playing the instrument and having some sort of emotional connection and getting that instant feedback. There's so much feedback you're getting from all of that's happening. That's really that's a really it's psychologically, that's a completely different way of working, and you come up with things completely different. And what I was missing when I was working with the hardware in the beginning was getting that immediate tactile feedback. And like, when you're working with a mouse, you're manipulating really things by a single point perspective. There's single clicks that you're doing, as opposed to working with like some sort of hardware hardware synthesizer. You can make dozens of adjustments in a matter of seconds that would take you several minutes to do.
100%. And then, we go back to the same, thinking about whoever's gonna realize that what we need is a multi-purpose controller that's not only reacting to a part of a touch screen. So it should be a touch screen, but it should be one of those like all those professional post mixers. I don't know if you ever saw like those Siemens mixer in Germany, where they have knobs coming out of the touch screen and basically physically organic interaction. So you can have a touch screen that can simulate whatever you want, be it a synth or equalizer or compressor, but then you have knobs almost like, but it's such an expensive thing, to do like holes in a touch screen coming out and reacting to pressure and dynamic. And something like that, I think that is what we need, something that recreates easily whatever synthesizer we want, be it a Minimoog, be it a Euromodular, and so we can actually see it. We can even touch it on the screen, but we have knobs that reacts, even like with different kind of easiness, like as you say, like stiffness, almost like a dynamic motor behind, that would be my dream, because now you can actually interact with a piece of software that we love. Like, think about interacting with Serum and the incredible potential, or Massive X, or whatever we have, but physically, and touching it, or even touching 4 different knobs, or interacting. So you're closing the cutoff, but you're also interacting with the envelope in the same time. That. I don't know why no one is thinking about it. It's gonna be probably expensive, because the technology behind it,
I think it's a difficult task. I think one of the best examples I've seen of this idea is what Spectrasonics have done with Omnisphere, where they've released these sort of like preset sets where you could load in any synthesizer, your Nordly 2 or.
But don't you think? And I love Spectrasonics. I think Eric is one if not the most talented, preset designer ever, existed, and he's so ahead of the curve with he was already when he started that he basically you could technically do an album just with Omnisphere, the database, the tagging system, everything is on point. But I mean, at least in my opinion, I read that move that he did. It's almost like a hubris move. It's almost like I will show you that I can actually, you can take whatever synth, I can map all those controls, and actually I'm gonna create presets that are from the same synth. So basically you're interacting with your synth using the same user interface, but you're actually using my synthesizer engine. So it's almost like an arrogant point of, do we really need it? I mean, we need it because it's cool to interact with all those parameters in front of you. But I mean, you know what I mean? Maybe we need something that's more neutral, that it can be adopted for even mixing, for doing different purpose, and remember that when was it the Icon, when Avid was the one previous to the S6 and the S3, the controller, I mean the Avid controller, they had dedicated channel strips for compressors and equalizer, and if you obviously were using the API from Avid, you could assign, so the same knob was for like giving you like dBs, or plus like high-end dBs, and the same knob was threshold for every compressor was using the same knobs. That's an interesting concept where every plugin, if you map it correctly, and the manufacturer had to map it, you would reach for the threshold, and every compressor was reacting to the threshold on that knob, but that was only for compressor and equalizer. Think about something that's for everything, almost like those controllers that I think you were actually trying one of those, the controller for the Juno software. There was like a physical controller, hardware controller for was it like Juno or a Jupiter 6 control? I mean, someone is released like a physical controller for one of these virtual instruments, Yeah, it's hard because it's such a wide area where you could apply, a virtual controller to music, be it, mixing, recording, or using a virtual instrument. But sooner or later, someone will try, or even like having, remember the Surface, not the Surface, yeah, the Surface desktop from Microsoft, where they had the Microsoft dial. Did you ever see that? So the dial, once you know that you can actually put it on the screen and the screen reacts to the dial. I mean, and I know very well one of the product designer inside Microsoft, and it's a friend of mine, he's an Italian guy, Simone. And I was constantly telling him, you should do this for music. And actually music is such a smaller, area of interest for them, and probably musicians are not like that, rich to afford to buy just a computer with a couple of microphone dials just to you. But that idea is incredible if you think about like small dials, smaller than that you place on a touch screen, and so you have a physicality, and you move and equalize a knob, be it a cutoff or an EQ, but then you remove it and you place it on another, and then you have a couple or 3 or 4, and let's say they are more magnetic, so that they can in some way. I mean, someone will find something like that, sooner or later. I hope.
Sooner or later, yeah. That to me is where, I think that's, I will still say this, and I've said it before in the past. I still feel that the computer is the most advanced musical instrument in the world. Yeah. You could still do the most amazing things with it. And it's just, like I said, I just stumble into these roadblocks when it comes to interfacing with it. And, I've had almost every controller that you could have imaginable out there. Because I use Ableton 10, I use Logic, I use Cubase, Nuendo. Mm-hmm. I've got Bitwig here, I use Reaper. I'm kind of hopping around different DAWs, trying all kinds of stuff all the time. And so I have multiple controllers. The Push, I have all the NI Machine controllers, and there's so many companies send me stuff, Akai, so I get to see every kind of flavor incarnation of new controller that comes out, and they all pretty much do the same thing. There's slight evolutions and things are happening. Of course, I'm using a lot of the MPE stuff with Roly. I have like the Roly C boards and the Roly block controllers, which are really fun. There's kind of added extra dimension there with more expressive ways of playing stuff, but I still feel this disconnect. It's still not like the direct connection I'm looking for, but it may be just me and my upbringing and how I was brought up using, analog synthesizers, like this machine that felt alive. You're really close to it, like, and the things that you do are immediate. It's like directly immediate feeling, and it's the circuits are just right underneath the board there. You're just
no latency too.
No latency.
Except for the memory Moog, which already had remember, if you had a memory Moog and it was one of those MIDI memory Moog with the Canton, I mean, you could feel some kind of lag while playing. It was weird because we were coming from like the most direct synthesizers, like where you I mean, the oscillators were like playing like just below your hand, and memory Moog was the first one that I remember playing it. Oh, what's this weird lag that I had? Obviously, one of the best sounding, synthesizer ever made, but also one of the most finicky, like the tuning. Where I never got my memory Moog to do, maybe once 6 out of 6, tuned. Like I don't know if you remember, every time I was trying to tune it, I was always 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 6. Never. It's very hard to see 6 out of 6 tuned. With that.
Yeah, my friend Brian had one, and he had or he still has his actually. I had a couple chances to buy one in the past. I had a couple friends that almost sold me one, and I decided to go with the Moog 1 16 voice. It's I could maybe say that that's like the modern version of the memory Moog, but in some ways, the memory Moog still sounds different to me, but I just, like you said, I didn't want to have to deal with all the maintenance issues. I wanted to have a more modern Moog that I could depend on a little bit more, even though my Moog 1 does crash every now and then, I do some crazy things with it. But
I sold mine, it was...
Oh, okay.
I mean, I had number 7, I was with them when they were, thinking about it, when they did the secret, I don't know were you at NAMM when they presented in a secret room the prototype a year before, releasing. So, and I already expressed to me there was something weird about the sound, especially in the higher frequencies, and I mean, they probably improved something, but to me, I mean, because I had this muscle memory probably inside my brain about the sound of a memory Moog, I was never intrigued or never really captured by the sound of memory. I was totally captured by the UI, such a genius UI, such a genius design of the panel, fantastic. Like top, I would say maybe the best ever made. Even just simply seeing like the shape of the waves, like right there, and the way to put in to zoom every section just by pressing. I mean, it's such a great idea, and the effects and the sense and everything is perfect. But to me, everything is perfect, but the sound to me is not top. I don't know. There's something that never really convinced me. Probably because in my mind I had the glorious fatness and incredible like in your face sound of those 18 oscillator in unison mode of the memory Moog, and maybe that's me,
It's hard to beat that.
I mean, listen, maybe it's not only me, because if you go on Reverb, you can find probably 35 right now, Moog 1 for sale versus no memory Moog for sale, So, I mean, there's something, but from a sound designer perspective, it's incredible. It's a dream,
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I got it. I didn't get an early serial number on mine. I got mine just recently.
Okay.
Maybe about 5 months ago. Amos and the guys, I know the guys at Moog pretty well. And so my serial number's like in the 3000s. And I know they did a bunch of revisions, and they revised a bunch of things from the earlier models, a lot of problematic issues that they were having and stuff. So there were several revisions I know that they did. That's what at least Amos had told me. I don't know exactly what had happened to improve performance and lower the fan noise and do all kinds of these things that are now it's like they were basically telling me is like, now's a great time to get one because all of the problems and things that people were complaining about are gone.
Yeah.
And I think I have my serial numbers in the 3000s or something.
Wow.
So it's a much later model that's got.
I think I sold mine with a plus because they even sent me the picture of them building it, and even like the original tag with 007. So whoever bought it, it was like probably still happy. And by the way, a lot of those were firmware updates. So I remember the fans really being like obnoxious at the beginning, but they really went, like in a couple of years, it really went down by at least half of the dBs, and also all those other quirks on the MIDI, and then everything was, I don't know, those guys are fantastic, they really take it seriously. So whenever they release something, there's like probably 5 years of, R&D and engineering and everything. So I mean, I was actually not complaining about anything. I was complaining just about having the memory Moog in my mind and thinking about having, the new memory Moog. That's not the right spirit to approach a Moog One, because you're gonna be probably disappointed.
I know I made the sort of relationship to the Moog One, but they're really two different instruments. The memory Moog has a much more brute sound to it that you're only going to get with like that machine, because it was using completely different components at the time, different technology. But it's a whole different instrument. It's like my Model D. Like I've got the Moog Model D. Actually, when they did the reissues, I got serial number 3 of the reissues.
Wow.
And and I got I've got a couple of I got the Dave Smith's Prophet 5. I got serial number 3 there, and then on the Waldorf Quantum, when they did the Shadow Edition, they only made 30 of them. I got serial number 3 of that one as well. So I got a couple low serial number classic synths in here. But the Model D is like, it was one of those synths that I never really got in the beginning, because I was always looking for very complex sounds, and I didn't understand it until I actually got one, and then I plugged it into my speakers, and then I was like, holy shit, this thing's dangerous. Like, I'll blow up my whole speakers. This thing's like an untamed beast. Like, it doesn't have that polished, engineered, controlled sound like all the other Moogs do. Like
Listen, I got RA Mini Moog, so pre-1000, and then I sold it to a friend for $1,200. Okay, probably worth today easily $15,000. Then I proceeded buying. I had for one of those wonderful MIDI Moog, the first MIDI Moog, the Studio Electronics one, where basically they were using the Mini Moog, boards, and I loved it. And I sold it to Roger, to Big City Music, for like $2,000, and it's probably worth like $4 or $5 now. Then I bought this Mini Moog, which is 2000 something, so still, not a RA, but still like great sounding. Well, I don't know if you see it. Maybe it's here. Whatever, it's. Well, let me switch. It's this one basically, and but for like $6,000, perfect circuit audio, And probably if I want to sell it now, it's gonna be $8,000-9,000. It's perfect condition and everything. And then I bought the new, I don't know if you have it, the MIDI Mini, the V3, the latest Studio Electronics MIDI Mini, which is highly recommended. So still incredible, still sounding like a Mini Moog, but with all this, newer and older, modification that they introduced on the MIDI Mini. So obviously the sync of all the oscillators, but now ring modulation between the 3 oscillators, distortion a la subsequent, just saturating the mixer of the 3 oscillators before hitting the filter. Then drone modes, where you don't even need to play anything, but it opens the VCAs, and then you can play with a couple of LFOs. And then, so many like interesting options, and then patch points, in the so fantastic. So now my mini / MIDI Moog, it's here, I will never sell it anymore, because I got the lesson, you don't have to, once you have a Mini Moog and it sounds great, it's one of those, sounding great, never sell it anymore.
Yeah, I'm not going to sell mine.
All those tricks with the phone. I don't know if you ever did like the phone trick, where you get the phone output and you feed it back and then you use the. I mean, it's like a guitar, like you were saying. It's such a tactile instrument. It's such a pulsating with you, and the wood and the feedback of the cutoff, and it seems like we're really geeks, but it's actually something you touch and you're like, how can you replicate? And listen, what's the name of the native instrument one? It's on point. I did like blind tests with friends of mine in my studio, and 2 out of 3 they were picking out that instead of the my minimum. If you obviously carefully match it before, it's great. So it's not about the sound; it's about the physicality of it.
Absolutely.
So regarding Euromodular, don't you feel that in the last 3-4 years, really all these new digitally controlled or digitally, digital-based modules are really changing the game in a great way, so that now the modular is not anymore the concept we always had in our 20s, 30s of this giant organic monster being able to be rough, but also to create, sequenced, like almost inharmonic or very, like not very evolving melodically and harmonically, but now with something like Symphonion or something like, all these new digital modules, like they're opening such a crazy, and creative way of building a full song on the modular. Not that you couldn't do that before, but now it's much easier. What are you excited about? Like, what is there like modules that are really excited, like that you're using day by day, like almost? Oh,
I get new stuff pretty much every day.
Yeah.
I just got a box of, I think it was six modules today from 2 different manufacturers, and then I just recently took a interest in getting into the mono realm. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Brian Crabtree.
I'm familiar, but yeah, I think I got one once. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with his latest generation of instruments. I got them all. I got the Arc, I got the Grids, I got Teletype, I got Norns, which is this DSP box where you can load hundreds of different algorithms and scripts, and it can be like Euclidean-based sequencers or just probability-based sequencers. And there's
What's the name of this one? What's the name of this one?
Norns, Norns.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little small gray box with a screen with just a couple of knobs. It's a very simplistic looking device, but it's basically a DSP powerhouse package, and then Brian also made a couple of Eurorack modules to interface with this. One of them's called Ansible, which also could connect to Norms, which is a smaller Eurorack module that has a USB port on the front, and then it's got multiple CV and gate assignable outputs. And then there's another one called Teletype.
Oh, I know. Now I got you. Now I finally understand what you're talking about, because I saw like these incredible videos about Teletype and together with Percassa, I think. That guy, there's a guy on YouTube doing this wonderful like generative music videos.
Stuff. Exactly. Yeah. So I've been looking. Really, my interest in diving into those is to get into more probability-based generative sort of sequencing, and those have been some new favorite things that I've been kind of getting my head around. And then another new favorite is the new vector sequencer by 512 by Jim Coker.
I have 2. I bought 2.
Yeah, oh, you got 2. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Jim did a great job on them. And I've been really a lot.
Don't you think that one of the I'm in love with sequencer in general. In general, be it the Polyend one, be it my old MPC from the 4000 to buying back the 2000 XL, and then buying all these like one Live 2, which actually is great because of the batteries and of the speaker, so you can go outside and basically make beats. And also all the Euromodular sequencer. I went through all of them. I love the WMD. What's the name? I don't even remember the name. The Metron, for drums. The Metron is great for drums, and with those Volterra and those, accent expansion. Really, it's taking care of all my drums. But also, the 512, it's incredibly easy to use. That's something that you don't find like. Think about Nerd Sequencer or even the Eloquenza, the Winter Modular Eloquenza. They're all great. I think everyone is actually appealing to a niche, you know, like obviously Nerd Sequencer is someone that wants to do like, you know, the old tracker thing. But the time, the amount, I don't have that time anymore. I mean, I have a kid, I have a wife, and I'm still making music 12 hours a day, and I have a record company. And so 512, the vector sequencer was such a breath of fresh air. I could use it without reading anything, you know, except for, you know, knowing that sometimes you have to press shift and pressing when you go into the global for the triggers. I could not find the triggers, and then it was just as easy as pressing the shift. But such a huge, with the expansion, you know, modules, such a huge quantity of incredible like triggers and CV and gates and skipping, and then you can sync it from my inner clock, but you can also sync it from the CV and gate, and so you can switch between two different environments for syncing. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's been my go-to so much recently, and Jim's awesome. I've known Jim for many, many years. Going back almost 15 years. I knew him because I was using his software, numerology.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and I met Jim back in New Mexico. He was good, close friends of mine. I actually met him through two friends of mine who did artwork on a few of my releases for my album releases. Two Santa Fe-based digital artists. They introduced me to Jim back in the day. We've been friends ever since. He's just such a great guy, and I've been following him. He's such an amazing DSP programmer, electrical engineer. He's just such a brilliant mind and such a sweet, down to earth guy too. You know, just love Jim, and he's just a brilliant guy. And really, when the Vector came out, when I first saw that he was going to be making something, just from all my past experiences working with numerology and all the crazy stuff I could do with that, especially with sequencing things, I knew that it was going to be.
I mean, listen, the whole implementation about chances and probabilities inside the 512, it's such a refreshing, easy pleasure. You know, actually, you know what? Once you experience that, you would love to have all the modules with those options, so easy to reach. Also, you would love to have 2 or 3 different layers of those. So an idea could be having like, not only, you know, because now you can choose only one per, but think about having multiple layers of probabilities, be it on the chord, on the key, on the length of the note, on the rest or not. I mean, that would blow my mind. Basically, the music will write by itself, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I've made so many just crazy regenerative patches on the Vector where I just let it go, and I'm like, hey, I'm just gonna let it go. It's just doing this crazy stuff, and like it's really is such an inspiring sequencer if you put the time into it. Like you said, it doesn't take that much time to get your head wrapped around it. It's funny, I had the nerd sequence. It's funny, I just sold my nerd sequencer to Andrew Huang.
Oh wow.
The YouTube star.
He came to my studio like last year before COVID to visit.
Oh, nice. Andrew just hit me up a couple days ago because I posted up my nerd sequencer, and like I just, like you, I have the Polyon tracker, which I've been really enjoying a lot. It's and I use the nerd sequencer quite a bit. It was taking me too long to get to things, just the way that it was laid out. And the Polyon tracker, I'm able to move much quicker at. And there's some certain cool things that I liked about the Polyon tracker that worked better for my workflow. That's all it really was. I was just like, you know what, I should just sell my nerd sequencer. It's not really for me. I tried it out for months and months and months and gave it a try, and it just didn't work out. But one other sequencer I wanted to mention that's kind of new, I have it right here, is the Flux.
Oh, you know what? Can I tell you something? I saw your post on your Instagram, and because I was so intrigued by the concept and by the design of it, you know, it's so beautiful that I wrote. I just pre-ordered one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
great.
I did.
You'll love it.
I think so.
Yeah, this one's cool too. Takara, I think I'm pronouncing it.
I don't even know that. I never saw that. Wow, what's that?
That's correct. Yeah. So these are all LEDs on here, and these are all push button.
That's cool.
Buttons that can sequence drums, and there's all these different modes.
Wow.
You can't really see them, but there's all these like recursive looping probability. this is going to be really fun too. I'm building up a new skiff to house all these newer generation sequencers that I'm going to kind of play around with and get. As soon as I get more time, I'm like you. I have 2 kids. I have a wife, and I've been married for 20 years. And
wow, congratulations.
Yeah, quite an achievement. We've been together for a while, but yeah, I've got a 3-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter, and it's since COVID happened, my daughter's been at home for homeschooling, and my son's school shut down, and so I have a crazy 3-year-old maniac running around the house all the time, and it makes it hard to focus and work sometimes. But I know it's not going to be like this forever. But yeah, so I tell people, time is the most important thing that I wish I could get more of these 100%. Days. It's not more gear. It's not more. I don't need more gear or anymore. I just need more time.
Yeah, I understand.
To do things.
What about the Udo? Did you get the Udo, the Super 6 or not?
I did.
Yeah, don't you love it? I love it.
It's funny, I have not got it yet. I put the order in several weeks ago to who was it?
Turnlab in Belgium or where?
Let me see here. Is it let me make sure. What is it, Katie? It's so funny. There's so many gear companies I'm talking with. I have to remember their names. But yeah, I ordered one of I got the gray face model, not the blue one.
Me too, because there were no blue available. So I said, well, okay, let me get and by the way, let me tell you, it's cool. It's as cool.
Yeah, I only got a chance to play with it at Super Booth in 2019. And
great.
I got to play with headphones. And what was the guy's name? I think it was him and his wife. I'm drawing a space here. It was.
He's the guy that did the Model 002, basically, and then he got his own company. Yeah.
That's right. It's George. Yeah, George and Maggie. I think this is Maggie Wood. Maggie Wood. She's the operations manager. I placed my order. This was about a month ago, but they're just getting stuff, and I was like, it's fine, take your time. I don't even have a place to put it right now. I have so much stuff.
But you won't regret it. It's such an inspiring, very well made. The UI, it's such a breath of fresh air too. Not too clanky, not too like it's very easy to understand. All those Roland's really, it's like a mix between a Roland UI and something more modern with it. It's fantastic. I mean, I love it. I love my Prophet 5 too. But
Yeah, it looked a lot similar to my Jupiter 6.
100%. Yeah.
It's a very similar layout, but like a modern, beefed up on steroids version, a binaural based, version of the updated modern feature set of the Jupiter 6. But it sounded really cool.
Do you have a favorite 303 clone or something you go for, or you go for an original 303, or is there something you really love? Like I have the Avalon and I love it. To me, in my opinion, I never even found something better than that, the Abstract Instruments, but...
My 2 favorites that I've been using recently, that I used on my last record, I have my original Devilfish.
Oh, wow!
Here. That's pretty.
If we go on Reverb, probably you can easily sell it for what, $6,000 probably right now.
Yeah, these are. Yeah, this is a 4.0 C Rev model. Yeah. I actually hand delivered this to Robin when I was touring in Australia.
Wow.
And so this 303 I've had since high school. Actually, I've had it since I was 18.
Fantastic.
Still pretty good shape. But I used this on my last record. I believe this number was. I think it's like number 193 when he did this. So I know there's not too many Devilfishes out there, but when it comes to the clones, I also had this one modded. This is the TT303.
Oh, the second one, I have one in Italy. Pretty nice.
By Midnight Engineering. And my friend Dan does all these mods, and they're great. He does all these modifications to them, and he's... you probably can't. I don't think I read all the.
I see. Yeah.
And he does these other mods. I have all kinds of stuff like independent square and square and sawtooth out for the oscillators, and then he's got some other. There's a supersonic switch, was like this crazy like overdrive bass booster, filter tracking. There's a different accent peak switches, and then you have a actual sweep speed, and then he's got this really cool fuzz switch here that has 3 different fuzz modes, which can get into some really grimy sounding stuff, and it's just it's just such a fun. I primarily use these 2 on my last record that came out last year in November.
A question: how do you typically track your synthesizers? Do you have a go-to channel strip? Do you have something that where you?
I've got a ton of stuff here. Most of the stuff that I've been doing lately, I use the I think it's the NSO2W. It's these 2 modules that take synth line input, and then they convert that to DB25 cable signal. And then I run that out. It's actually plugged in over here. And I can track, if I want, I could just track 32 channels of stuff into 2 Apollo 16X that I have racked at the bottom here.
Oh, cool.
So sometimes I'll just capture the stems that way. But I also have a drum processing rig there, 500 series rack with a bunch of, I've got 2 Distressor EL8Xs, the British mod versions, and I've got like a pair of 4 of the API 505 DIs, a bunch the 550 BEQs, 527 API compressors. I've got the SSL G comp compressor, a pair of the 11. Wait, what's in the JR? I think they're the Heritage Audio, EQs and stuff. That are really nice for kind of just adding this like nice, just 1173 style kind of EQ, which is kind of a pillowy, warm sound.
There's something that I found really cool tracking synthesizers and drum machines, if on the mangling side or simply on the character side, which is, I don't know if you're familiar, Overstayer, the modular channel.
Modular channel's
the
great.
modular channel is great because in 2 units you just have mic pre's, DI inputs, line inputs, but also you have the 2 synth filter, the equalizer, the compressor, and the 3 different distortions. So, and then all running in parallel. So it's like a synthesizer dream. So you have that channel. I have like my MPC going there, my Machine Plus going there, but also a couple of synths. And just by switching from DI, some of them they go DI, some of them they go line, but then I can add character very easily, and I can keep it parallel, so I still keep a little bit of the dry sound inside. I found very useful if someone doesn't want to invest into like 50 outboard gear for just recording synthesizers.
Yeah, I've been kind of doing a bit of all kinds of stuff here. I just picked up a couple 1176 Purple Audio MC77 compressors, and I've got a ton of outboard stuff here that I used on my last record, and I've been kind of going back. It's funny. I had a mixing board, but then as soon as I got the Flock Audio patch, I've been using the Flock Audio system.
I'm always on the verge of buying it, and every time I go at NAMM, I never understand if the wiring inside is really that great or not, because it seems not to be really pushing the inside. If I would do something like, I would show the quality, but people bought it, friends of mine, and they're showing me RTA, cures where basically it's exactly like having it connected with an XLR. So I think I'm gonna take the plunge. Finally, I'm gonna buy it.
Yeah, the ease, the flexibility of using the software, having all of my hardware plugged into a hub where I can just drag and drop and then store and recall presets in any configuration at one mouse click, and then I'm like, I want my Manley Veramu compressor here. I want my my MEA2 Maslec here or whatever, and I can just throw them on a mix, and then just they're already in the chain, and you're just twisting a couple knobs, and I'm like printing already.
Did you ever try those West Audio outboard gear? Now they have this big NG bass compressor. I have one here, which is basically.
I saw it at NAMM.
I mean, the software part, the plugin part works really great for the recallability. So everything is recallable, from the plugin. And actually, you can write automation both on the plugin or enabling automation on the DAW using the physical gear. So let's say you're writing the output level of the SSL compressor or the threshold between the chorus and the verse. You can actually put Pro Tools in auto write and then grab the threshold and you instantly write on the automation, which is, or the same on a Pultec. They have the Pultec, which the solid state version, not tube, and then you actually tweak the high end more in the chorus, and you're writing that on your DAW. And obviously, it's and the quality. I mean, I have also two, Steve Jackson Pultecs, the new detented one, the 3 units, the big ones, $12,000 worth of Pultecs. It's not sounding that different, this small West Audio thing. So, I mean, I'm impressed because nowadays recallability is everything. If I have to start writing on my recall sheet, the Pultecs are detented, and I tend to buy detented stuff. So the Fusion is not detented, but at the very end, I use the Fusion almost in the same spot. And then I have a big copy mixer where I basically use it as a summing mixer by copy, and then some copy 558, some copy 560. So basically recreating a small API, discrete with those old 70s transformer. But, having your gear that recalls by itself automatically when you open the session, but still has transformers inside. I mean, it's a pretty cool stuff. Also, the new Better Maker, they just released, the Darth limit, the all black version of the limiter. I don't use it as a limiter, but I use it a lot as a distortion device for those 2 frequencies that they have, where you can excite and distort, let's say 10,000 or 100, so to create some kind of, more active on smaller speaker, like your mix is going to be more like, and I love that. There's the same concept as West Audio, basically a plugin that recalls the whole setup and it's an analog limiter. So everything is still analog, but everything is fully recallable. I think that's the way to go in the future, because we want to.
Sure. Yeah. Like I was looking at the Better Maker stuff as well, but the thing I was curious about the NG bus compressor.
I love it.
Is it bi-directional? Say, like when you're automating, can you automate from the hardware and it'll record the automation from the hardware into your DAW?
Totally. That's what you can do. It's fantastic. I mean, listen, like to grab, I don't know if you see it, it's here, but but the fact that I can grab the threshold, and I don't know if you see, let me go on the bigger one, maybe. Let me see if you can see something bigger, maybe, it's not that big, but I don't know if you see something. So the moment I touch it, it becomes active. So, and it writes the automation to Pro Tools, and you can actually see the plugin moving real time. So if you automate the track, instantly you write the automation. It's fantastic.
That's what I was really intrigued by it when I went by their booth at NAMM.
Me too. I went there and I pre-ordered one,
Yeah, I was like, I need to check this out, because I get so much gear here. It's like I really have to choose what I'm going to.
Exactly.
It's because I'm running out of space, but we're going to probably move in a year. We're looking at moving into a bigger house, and I'm going to probably build a much bigger studio in the next space. So I'm definitely going to pick one up. It's a very intriguing.
And it sounds great. And the distortion, the THD option to feedback a little bit of distortion, and also it has a transformer where you can put in the before just hitting the output, so you can overload the transformer, then you can pad the output before hitting the output. So it's a pretty comprehensive and good sounding unit, and considering all these steps are fully automatable, it's incredible. Like not even use that just as a compressor, just a color device using the transformers. It's great because we have a lot of options inside the box. All this UBK / what's the name,
all
these omega transformers, the tweaker, all these transformers, they sound great, and also all those what's the name?
Gregory's great. I love Gregory's stuff.
He lives here in Silver Lake now. Yeah, he came to my studio just before the COVID. We were actually planning to make music together. He with his wife are doing great music together. I don't know if you ever heard.
Yeah, I listened to some of the stuff on his. They have a couple pieces up on YouTube, and I followed his. He's got a podcast. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
After an after hours type thing where they talk about. I love Gregory. I think is just one of those people who's doing really
well.
I have his Clariphonics MS.
Yeah.
down here in one of my bottom racks. I
Yeah.
use that. I use a lot of his plugins too. I just
Yeah.
love his philosophy
Yeah.
and his just whole approach about how he thinks about using compressors and using compressors just creatively, thinking about the
Timbre.
motion.
Sound and
Yeah,
timbre. Yeah, yeah.
motion, like really, really just, I like his thought process. I like his whole approach. I really feel like he's one of the rare few people that are really trying to think of it more from a creative standpoint, not just from like this utilitarian type of thing, you know, like, hey, you can use these things in different ways to kind of bring a little more movement into a piece of music. And, you know, I like his, you know, just his whole idealistic approach to how you can use these pieces of hardware in different ways.
I love it too. Richard, I think we could talk for 3 hours more, but probably people's gonna like die on the other side of Twitch. So there's a couple of questions that I was just reading,
Sure.
and some of these are in Italian. So let me just translate that for you. So Leon October is asking, quando una delle sue... Okay, when you build an Eurorack patch, is there a mental process that you go through or that you prefer using it? For example, is saying, do you prefer starting with a kick drum, so probably building a drum, you know, a drum pattern, and then adding texture sounds after, you know, having like done the drums? And how do you create your evolving textures when you post, you know, all those Eurorack patches on your Instagram, on your socials, you know? So it's 3 questions in one, basically. Do you?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll try to answer. I'll try to answer these in the best way possible here. Yeah, typically when I start out, you know, patching on this on the modular, you know, it's I don't. Sometimes I have an idea in my head of what I want to do, and I'll, you know, be thinking about something during the daytime if I'm working on something else. So it's just like, oh, I have this idea I want to try. You know, maybe after I finish up some work, I'll fire it up and see if I can achieve this weird idea that I have in my head. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I get pretty close to what I'm imagining this idea to be. Sometimes I'll get it close to about 60, 70% there. It may not be 100%. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, you know, in many instances I'll fail to. There's a lot of times I'll try something and it doesn't come anywhere close to what I wanted to do, but it turned into something cool that it didn't have really anything to do with my original idea. And then it forced me to do something different. And it could have been any number of factors that changed that. Maybe I didn't execute it properly, or I patched something wrong, or something got disconnected or broken along the way, and it forced me to go down a whole other path, which was equally as interesting.
Exactly.
And that's why I love the modular so much, is that it can lean so many different directions based on, you know, even just the most minute changes, or something accidentally could go wrong, or you could create this spontaneous thing to happen that you would have never thought to do. Been like, oh, that wasn't what I was going for, but that sounds really interesting as it is. So I might as well try this out. But, you know, going back to this question, a lot of times sometimes I start out with the beats. Sometimes it's a rhythm that I have in mind. I want to work at a certain tempo, or sometimes I don't work with any drums at all. Sometimes I just start playing around with, you know, maybe a Euclidean-based sequencer, sequencing various notes, and I have some sort of like scale that I want to work in, or some harmonic pattern that I'm, you know, in a mood. It's basically just on whatever current state of my mood is, or wherever I'm wanting to kind of experiment with. So it's kind of really all over the place. There isn't really any kind of set, you know, I do things that like a certain way every single time the same way. It's kind of all over the place. One day I don't even use the modular. Sometimes I'm just playing in the computer on some software, you know, and another day I have an idea. I'm like, maybe I should try this patch idea that I have I've been kind of thinking about over the past few days. And sometimes another thing that I've been doing is I use Vcv Rack and Me Rack on my iPad.
Oh, wow.
So and a lot of times, yeah, I'll be, you know, on the couch. I've got to watch the kids or something. My wife's out at the store or something. So I'll sit there while they play or watch their TV shows. And I'll be like, well, let me can't sit in front of my modular, but I can open up Me Rack on my iPad and concept a few ideas and see if these ideas might work, so I might throw a couple modules. They may not be the same exact modules, but it may just be like, well, I just need a clock generator. I need an envelope generator. I need a couple of things. I want to just test this idea out and see if it's something that might be interesting to take to my actual Eurorack system. So I do a lot of proof of concept stuff and kind of like prototyping patches on Vcv Rack and Me Rack on iOS just before I go to my modular. And sometimes, and pretty much, I would say, 60 to 80% of the time, I can get pretty close to what I concept on there because there's so many modules available, and a lot of the same. Like for mutable instruments, for instance, most of the modules available are open source. There, I use a lot of the
different firmwares.
Stuff. Yeah. So that for me has been such a great way for coming up with new ideas and trying out new things before I even get to the modular. Especially when you have limited time. Sometimes, and what's nice about, of course, what's Vcv Rack is you can store stuff as a preset and come back to it. Whereas on the modular, you basically, you're stuck in leaving the patch until you record it, and then you have to pull everything. So I've found that working with both of these environments has been a really nice way for me to test ideas. And then like when I have the very limited time, and for only the really good stuff that I come up with on Vcv Rack or Me Rack, then I take those ideas and then I transfer them over to the actual system and execute them fully out into a patch. And that's been a pretty good workflow for me most recently. So
did you ever change your workflow of patching from, I remember like my first 5 years with modular were basically constantly exploring and constantly resetting the whole modular system every time I was starting a patch. Obviously the system grows, your actually sensibility starts to be like in some way deeper. So you want to develop your own, almost like pre-made patching, especially if you are using a sequencer. And just lately, after actually interviewing Second Breakfast, it was inspiring to me. I got these tendrils cables that really help to, if you want to build, let's say my Metro now is connected always to my 2 bass drum, my 2 snare drums, my effects on the insert. So I don't want to change that, at least for like a couple of months, because I'm enjoying so much. So my mindset is changed. Some of my modular is basically acting as a semi-modular. I pre-made this connection that I think are the best for now, because that envelope, that Schweiman, I didn't even know how do you pronounce it, Schweiman, that Schweiman ADSR, it's great, the CTG VC, and it's so, transienty that I want to use it only for my plucky stuff, so that's gonna be so did you find yourself like now using pre-made patching that you never 50% you never change, or you're constantly still going back to scratch every time from zero?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
I have you can't see here, but on my floor I have 4 or 5 cases of what I call floater based systems. And what I mean by that is not all the modules are screwed in. They're just modules placed in there. They're kind of floating around because I'm testing things. I'm always getting new modules that I'm trying to learn. So I'm not really committing these to screwing them in. I'm just learning them in different combinations, trying to figure out their strengths and weaknesses and trying to get a better grasp of what they're all about. And then I have, I guess, 4 or 5, bigger cases of stuff where stuff is more permanently set. And the way that I work with the bigger systems, and I know a lot of people that probably see my videos are like, wow, he's got all this, it's just a cacophony of wires and stuff. And, they'll hear some of my patches and like, how is all that stuff playing just these like 8 sounds that we're hearing in this patch? And then they're not hearing everything. They're only hearing one patch that's patched in. What's actually that they're seeing, there's actually 5 or 6 patches all patched in right now, all playing, but they're not turned up on the mixer. I have them muted. So the way that I've been working on my bigger systems is I usually start out a patch, I'll work on it, I'll get it to a certain point where I'm like, all right, I think I've worked on this enough. I need to take a break from it,
Mm-hmm.
mute it, I'll come back to it. And so what I do is I work on several patches at the same time,
Oh, wow.
or different ideas, but I just leave them patched in different areas of the system, because each system I've designed has its own set of drum sequencers, its own voices, its own effects, its own everything. They're all self-contained systems that can generate music all by themselves, in one case by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
or a couple of cases. So what people are actually seeing in my videos is they're seeing like 5 or 6 patches, but they're only hearing one patch
That's
out of all
cool.
those 5 or 6. So that's it's a great way to be productive. And if you're working on something and you don't want to have to pull it, it took me a few years to set up things that way, but I was trying to constantly figure out, well, what if I get bored one night of this patch and I want to start something else?
Yeah.
I'd like to have another system that I could start another idea on. Work on that.
Do you remember when you get? I mean, I remember when you start designing your big modular at the beginning. You start thinking, oh, I should get different subsets. You know, I mean, I remember like, oh, I should create smaller mini synths. You know, like because once it's bigger than, let's say, 1500 HP, or if it's 2000 HP, you can't actually easily reach, so you need to create subsets. Then I remember switching to, no, I want to have 2 rows of 164 HP only oscillators, and then all, basically recreating that. But there's never a great, I mean, depending on where you are with your mind. Now you're telling me this, and I actually, what I did with these 3, Pittsburgh, I did a drum one, then I did a texture one, and then I did the crazy one, the one with all the, the modules that I don't. But I'm not even sure that I'm gonna keep it like this for more than a couple of more months, because now your idea is great, like creating, self-contained system with outputs and drums and everything, and maybe even mixers where you can basically run it. And actually makes even more sense because you can explore more just that minimal subset instead of,
Exactly.
once you start having 2000 HP, you have probably what, 12 oscillators, at least 12 LFOs. So every time but maybe this LFO will oscillate better than these other 12 LFOs. Let me try every single. It's like when you get outboard for the first time and you're mixing. And I remember at some point having 220 units worth of outboard gear. So like 18 stereo compressor. Every mix I was doing in 2006, but let me try this on the master, but this on the drum, but let me so it was like 9 hours of trial and error. And then after a while, you develop your own chains, your own ideas, that's the way to learn. Probably the modular journey is a journey as long as your life. Probably we're going to continue changing way of using, or becoming smaller or bigger in 10 years, who knows? And it's such a pleasure, just also a pain.
It is pain, yeah. It's like, I felt, just from my personal explorations with modular, since having been using them for so many years, that my brain works better when I digest things in smaller chunks, and that's why I set that up that way. These smaller compartmentalized systems within bigger systems. Because when I tried to use my system like as a big system, I felt like I wasn't patching as good. I would just reach for modules just for face value, face functionality. And my patches weren't as interesting, because I feel like I work much better when I'm working with like a small instrument that's like very intimate, and it's got just, you try to figure out every little control of that thing, and you limit you enforce limitations.
Limits are great. You create your own limits. We try to create limits when we're building albums, songs. I try to create a border for my artists to play inside, because then we connect back when we were 12 or 14. We could, I mean, at least I couldn't afford more than a couple of samplers and a drum machine, and I was still making, a lot of creative music with that. So I think it's a way to, limiting yourself is actually boosting your creativity. I mean,
absolutely. I believe in that 100%.
Yeah.
And I've had to test that skill many times for myself. That a lot of manufacturers, they send me they'll send me some new keyboard, for instance. Say like Novation or Roland or Korg or Yamaha. They'll ask me to work on a design project for them where I have to really figure out this instrument, the structure, the environment, understand all the feature set of the instrument, and be able to create very expressive, interesting, captivating sounds for them, just with this instrument. We're not allowed to use any other tools. I can't use my favorite compressors, EQs, or whatever to beef up the sound. I have a specific tool set that I've been given that I have that I have to work with, and then I have to figure out how to get, and find all of these sweet spots with this environment to create this this hopefully very interesting, varied, variety of different sounds that hopefully is captivating for people that play these instruments. So it's a weird skill that I never thought that was going to be kind of a job for me, because I just kind of fell into it by accident. But and once, I think when I first started doing sound design for, I think some of the first companies I worked for, I think I worked with Korg back in 2003, 2004 on the Oasis and the Radius synthesizer, and then later worked on their legacy and digital suite plugins, and then the mini log series, working with Tats and all of the newer instruments, Mod Wave and Op 6 and their newer generation stuff. I've been working with them for quite a while, but yeah, it's like I developed this weird skill of hey, what if I had to make music just with this keyboard and had to make every sound, like drums, bass sounds, lead sounds, pads, textures, any kind of type of sound that you would use as a compositional tool piece within a bigger context of a music composition. If I only had that piece of equipment to make the entire track with, could I do it? So one exercise I do quite often is I make tracks just with one piece of gear to see what it can do.
That's great.
And it's an exercise that I had to do many times with manufacturers. They said like Clavia, Nord. I've worked a lot with them on internal patches and Access Virus, where they were like, now that you've made these sounds for us, it would be great if you could create a couple demos of just the synthesizer, it making all of the sounds. Let's try not to use any other external drum libraries or any other synths. If we could just do everything with just a synthesizer to showcase how versatile this synth can be. That was a skill that I had to keep repeatedly exercise through every client that would knock on my door. And it was kind of a weird skill to kind of learn, but it really teaches you that, wow, like you'll find a lot of instruments are really good at certain things and not good at certain things, but then you kind of you develop this close, intimate relationship with this instrument, and I think that's where I love focusing in on one thing. I feel like I'd work better when I focus just on one or maybe two things at a time and really, really try to find every little infinite detail of that instrument and get really hone in on it. And I feel like I can get a lot more from it than just trying to incorporate all this stuff that I have here in one session, on a bigger scale. So I feel like I get lost even in my own studio when it comes to that stuff.
Richard, thank you so much for your time. I loved it. Like I said, we can talk for 3 more hours, and
Totally.
but thank you. It was just a small exploration on how our mind actually works when we relate to making music, electronic music, DAW, Euro Rack, or everything else that's connected to making music with an electronic instrument.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll actually upload this on YouTube, so it's gonna be shareable with everyone. I bet there's gonna be a lot of people gonna watch it later, because of the time frame that's now in Europe, and also people discover these things always, like in offline more than online. But it's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Richard. See you very soon. Bye. Bye, Richard. Ciao. Bye. Ciao, ciao. Bye, bye. Bye. Let me. Bye, guys.